The very first episode of Family Guy, titled Death Has a Shadow, aired on January 31st, 1999, and it introduced the world to Stewie Griffin in all his villainous glory. Right from the start, the show made it clear that this wasn't going to be your typical animated baby. While most cartoon infants are designed to be cute, cuddly, and helpless, Stewie emerged as something entirely different. A sharp-tongued, murderous genius trapped in a one-year-old's body, already plotting the downfall of his mother and fantasizing about world conquest. In that premiere episode, we get our first glimpse of Stewie's criminal mindset when he's watching television. The show establishes immediately that Stewie's mental capacity far exceeds his physical age. He speaks in complete, sophisticated sentences with an upper-class British accent that sounds like it belongs to a wealthy aristocrat rather than a toddler in diapers. But more importantly, the episode shows us that Stewie already harbors intense hostility toward Lois. He doesn't just dislike her the way a fussy baby might cry when hungry. He actively despises her with the kind of calculated hatred that takes planning and forethought. The pilot episode plants the seeds for what would become Stewie's defining characteristic for the first several seasons: his obsession with matricide. When Lois tries to help him or comfort him, Stewie responds with threats and insults that go completely over her head. She treats his angry outbursts as normal baby babbling, having no idea that her infant son is literally promising to end her life. This creates one of the show's earliest running gags, where Stewie makes explicit death threats that Lois either can't understand or chooses to ignore, creating this darkly comedic dynamic where attempted murder becomes background noise in the Griffin household. By the second episode, I Never Met the Dead Man, Stewie's criminal activities escalate significantly. This is where we see him actually attempt to harm Lois, rather than just threatening her. The episode features a scene where Stewie tries to push a heavy object onto Lois while she's not looking. The attempt fails, of course, because this is a sitcom, and killing off main characters in episode 2 would be a bold but probably unwise choice. But the important thing is that Stewie tried. He saw an opportunity to commit matricide, and he took it without hesitation, without remorse, and without any of the moral conflict you might expect from someone contemplating murder. What makes these early crimes particularly interesting is how casually they're presented. The show doesn't treat Stewie's murder attempts as shocking or horrifying. They're played for laughs, woven into the fabric of normal family life in Quahog. Lois is doing laundry, and Stewie is trying to electrocute her with a toaster. Peter is watching television, and Stewie is in the background, constructing what appears to be a small explosive device. Meg is complaining about school, and Stewie is sharpening a knife while staring at a photograph of Lois. The juxtaposition of mundane domestic scenes with casual homicide attempts creates this absurdist comedy that became one of Family Guy's signatures. Mind Over Murder, from Season 1, gives us another early example of Stewie's criminal behavior. In this episode, we see Stewie attempting to use psychological manipulation as a weapon. He's not just relying on physical violence or explosive devices. He's trying to break Lois down mentally, to make her question her own sanity and competence as a mother. This shows a sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare that goes way beyond what you'd expect from a one-year-old. He plants evidence to make Lois think she's losing her mind. He gaslights her about events that did or didn't happen. He uses her maternal instincts against her, pretending to be a helpless baby when it suits him, and then revealing his true nature the moment her back is turned. The domestic destruction Stewie causes in these early episodes also counts as criminal activity, even if it's often played for laughs. He sets fires in the Griffin home, not accidentally like a curious toddler might, but deliberately as part of his schemes. He destroys furniture, valuable possessions, and family heirlooms without any regard for the property damage he's causing. In A Hero Sits Next Door, Stewie causes significant damage to the house, while Peter is distracted by his rivalry with Joe Swanson. The family assumes it's just normal baby chaos, but we, the audience, can see that Stewie is methodically dismantling things as part of some larger plan that he never quite explains. What's particularly chilling about Stewie's early crimes is the complete absence of remorse. Most characters, even villains, show some moment of doubt or hesitation before committing terrible acts. Stewie shows none of that. When he points a gun at Lois or sets a trap that could seriously harm her, he does it with the same casual attitude most people bring to making a sandwich. There's no internal conflict, no last-minute change of heart, no moment where he looks at his mother and remembers that she feeds him and changes his diapers and keeps him alive. He's fully committed to her destruction from day one. The episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang is particularly significant because it features Stewie's first birthday party. This episode is important for several reasons. First, it establishes that Stewie was 0 years old at the start of the series and is now turning 1, giving us a timeline for his character. Second, it shows us more of Stewie's backstory through flashbacks, including his time in Lois's womb, where he claims to have been plotting his revenge even before birth. The episode includes a flashback showing that Stewie's hatred of Lois began during his 9-month stay in what he calls her ovarian Bastille, suggesting that his murderous tendencies are quite literally prenatal. But beyond the backstory, Chitty Chitty Death Bang also features several criminal acts. Stewie sabotages his own birthday party, not because he's having a tantrum like a normal 1-year-old might, but because he's genuinely angry about the entire concept of celebrating another year of his existence in this family. He views his birthday as a reminder of his imprisonment in infant form, and he takes out his frustration on everyone around him. He destroys decorations, attacks other children at the party, and makes several attempts to ruin the event entirely. When you think about it, assaulting other children at a birthday party definitely counts as criminal behavior, even if everyone just assumes it's normal baby roughhousing. The early episodes also establish Stewie's relationship with Rupert, his teddy bear. At first, this might seem like a typical child's attachment to a stuffed animal, but Stewie treats Rupert as his confidant, his partner in crime, and occasionally as an authority figure whose approval he seeks. He discusses his murder plans with Rupert, asking the bear's opinion on the best methods for killing Lois. He shares his frustrations about failed attempts with Rupert, and when things go wrong, he sometimes blames Rupert for not warning him properly. This relationship with an inanimate object shows Stewie's isolation and his need for connection, even as he plans terrible crimes. It also raises interesting questions about his sanity. Is he genuinely hallucinating that Rupert responds to him, or is this just his way of thinking through problems out loud? Throughout Season 1, we see Stewie engaging in various forms of sabotage around the Griffin household. He tampers with the car brakes, hoping Lois will be the one to drive and crash. He loosens bolts on furniture so it will collapse when Lois sits down. He puts dangerous chemicals in containers that Lois might accidentally ingest. None of these attempts succeed, of course, because Lois has the kind of cartoon character luck that keeps her alive despite constant assassination attempts. But the attempts themselves are what matter from a criminal standpoint. Attempted murder is still a serious crime, even when it fails. What's also worth noting about these early crimes is how they establish patterns that will continue throughout the series. Stewie builds his first weapons in Season 1, starting with simple gadgets and gradually working his way up to more complex devices. He experiments with different methods of killing, learning from each failure and adjusting his approach. He studies Lois's habits and routines, looking for vulnerabilities he can exploit. He's not just randomly violent. He's methodical, calculated, and constantly refining his technique. This is a baby who approaches murder the way most people approach a hobby they're passionate about. The episode The Sun Also Draws shows Stewie's willingness to commit crimes beyond just attacking Lois. When the family takes a trip, Stewie causes chaos at various stops along the way. He shoplifts from a convenience store, not because he needs the items, but because he can. He vandalized property at a Native American casino. He starts a small fire in a hotel room. These crimes don't serve any larger purpose in his quest to kill Lois or take over the world. They're just casual acts of chaos and destruction that Stewie commits because he finds them entertaining. This shows us that his criminal tendencies aren't limited to specific targets. He's genuinely antisocial and destructive by nature. By the end of season 1, the show has firmly established Stewie as a character who exists in constant criminal activity. His day-to-day life is filled with plots, schemes, weapons development, and murder attempts. This isn't occasional behavior for him. It's his normal state of being. While other babies are learning to walk and talk, Stewie is perfecting his ray gun designs and studying human anatomy to find the most efficient kill zones. The contrast between what he should be doing at his age and what he's actually doing creates this absurdist foundation that the entire character is built on. One of the most impressive and terrifying aspects of Stewie's criminal career is his ability to design and construct advanced weapons and technology, despite being a 1-year-old baby. We're not talking about simple tools or crude devices here. Stewie builds functioning laser weapons, mind control devices, weather manipulation systems, and eventually even time machines. The fact that he can conceive of these technologies, gather the necessary materials, and actually construct working prototypes is remarkable. It's also deeply concerning from a public safety standpoint, because it means there's an infant in Quahog with access to weapons technology that surpasses most military arsenals. Stewie's first laser gun appears in the early episodes of Season 1, and it immediately establishes that this baby has access to technology that shouldn't exist. The weapon fires actual energy beams that can cause real damage. It's not a toy that makes laser sounds while flashing colored lights. It's a functional directed energy weapon that could theoretically kill someone if Stewie's aim was better, or if his targets didn't have cartoon physics protecting them. The fact that he built this device in his nursery, using materials he somehow acquired without any of the adults noticing, shows both his genius-level intelligence and his complete lack of concern for weapons regulations, or basic safety protocols. What's particularly interesting about Stewie's early weapons development is that we sometimes get glimpses of his workshop. His nursery contains a secret laboratory where he conducts experiments, builds prototypes, and stores his growing arsenal. This raises so many questions that the show never really answers. Where did he get the tools? How does he power these devices? Where does he source the materials needed to build laser guns and robots? How has nobody in the family noticed that their baby's room contains enough technology to stock a small military base? The show handwaves these questions because they're not really the point, but from a criminal investigation standpoint, Stewie is running an illegal weapons manufacturing operation out of a residential home in a suburban neighborhood. In Mind Over Murder, we see Stewie working on what appears to be a mind control device. The episode shows him testing the device on Brian, the family dog, with partial success. The technology is clearly still in development, not quite ready for full deployment, but the fact that Stewie is even attempting to build mind control technology shows the scope of his ambitions. He's not content with simple weapons that can kill one person at a time. He's working toward technologies that can control populations, bend people to his will, and give him the kind of power he needs for his world domination schemes. The construction of these devices also represents multiple crimes beyond just weapons possession. Stewie is certainly violating numerous laws regarding unlicensed weapons manufacturing. He's probably breaking laws about hazardous materials, given that some of his devices seem to use radioactive or otherwise dangerous power sources. He's definitely violating intellectual property laws, because some of his designs appear to be reverse engineered from existing technology that he's somehow accessed and modified. And depending on how he's acquiring materials, he may also be guilty of theft, fraud, or illegal importation of controlled substances and materials. One episode shows Stewie building what he calls a weather control device, a small machine that can supposedly manipulate atmospheric conditions. He tests it by creating a small localized storm in the backyard, complete with thunder, lightning, and heavy rain that soaks Peter while leaving the rest of the neighborhood dry. The device works, proving that Stewie has somehow cracked the science behind weather manipulation, a technology that entire governments have tried and failed to develop. The existence of this device represents a massive threat to public safety. In the wrong hands, or rather, in Stewie's hands, Weather control technology could be weaponized to cause devastating natural disasters, destroy crops, flood cities, or create droughts that kill thousands. Stewie's engineering process also deserves examination. He doesn't just randomly throw parts together and hope they work. We occasionally see him sketching blueprints, running calculations, and testing prototypes. He follows the scientific method, albeit in the service of creating illegal weapons. He identifies problems with his designs and iterates new versions to solve those problems. When his first laser gun overheats after prolonged firing, he develops a cooling system for the second version. When his mind control device has limited range, he works on amplifying the signal. This methodical approach shows that Stewie isn't just naturally gifted. He's applying genuine scientific and engineering principles to his weapons development. The materials he uses are another mystery worth pondering. Some episodes show Stewie raiding the garage for tools and parts, suggesting he's repurposing household items into components for his devices. But there's no way he's building advanced energy weapons using just what's available in a typical suburban home. He must have access to specialized materials, rare elements, and advanced electronic components. How is he ordering these items? Does he have credit cards? Is he stealing them? Has he hacked into supply chains? The show never explains, but every possibility represents additional crimes. In Da Boom, the Y2K episode, we see Stewie with what appears to be a small nuclear device. He doesn't use it, but the fact that he possesses it is significant. Building or possessing nuclear weapons without authorization is one of the most serious crimes possible, crossing into international terrorism territory. Even if the device is relatively small, even if Stewie never actually detonates it, the mere possession of a nuclear weapon by a civilian, let alone a baby, represents a catastrophic security breach. This is the kind of thing that would normally bring down the full force of multiple government agencies if anyone knew about it. Stewie's weapons also show increasing sophistication as the series progresses. His early devices are powerful but crude, with limited functionality and obvious design flaws. But by season 2 and 3, he's building weapons with multiple functions, backup systems, and elegant engineering solutions. His ray guns get smaller and more powerful. His robots become more autonomous and intelligent. His mind control devices grow more effective and harder to detect. This progression shows that Stewie is constantly learning, constantly improving his craft, and becoming more dangerous with each passing episode. The security implications of Stewie's weapons lab are staggering. He has no safety protocols, no regulatory oversight, no one checking his work to make sure he's not about to accidentally blow up the neighborhood. He conducts dangerous experiments with high-energy systems in a house where other people are sleeping in nearby rooms. He stores volatile materials and furniture that could tip over at any moment. He leaves loaded weapons lying around where they could be found by other children or triggered by accident. From a criminal liability standpoint, Stewie is creating an attractive nuisance, maintaining a hazardous environment, and endangering everyone around him through his complete disregard for basic safety measures. Beyond murder attempts and weapons manufacturing, Stewie's early criminal career also includes multiple incidents of kidnapping, hostage-taking, and unlawful imprisonment. These crimes show a different side of Stewie's villainy, one focused on control and domination rather than straightforward violence. When Stewie takes someone hostage, he's not usually trying to kill them immediately. He's trying to bend them to his will, to make them suffer, or to use them as leverage in some larger scheme. One of Stewie's earliest and most frequent kidnapping victims is Brian, the family dog. Throughout the early seasons, Stewie repeatedly forces Brian into situations where he can't escape, essentially holding him prisoner for various purposes. Sometimes, Stewie needs Brian's help with a scheme and knows Brian won't cooperate voluntarily. Other times, Stewie is just bored and wants someone to talk to who can actually understand his sophisticated vocabulary. And occasionally, Stewie holds Brian hostage specifically to punish him for some perceived slight or failure to assist with earlier plans. The power dynamic between Stewie and Brian in these early episodes is fascinating because Brian is physically much larger and stronger than Stewie. Yet Stewie maintains control through weapons, threats, and psychological manipulation. In several episodes, we see Brian tied up in Stewie's room while Stewie lectures him about philosophy, world domination strategies, or his latest plans for Lois. Brian is clearly being held against his will, but he also seems resigned to it, almost like he's accepted that periodically being kidnapped by the baby is just part of his life now. In Brian, Portrait of a Dog, Stewie takes advantage of Brian's situation when Peter sends the dog to obedience school. While this episode is primarily about Brian's struggle with his identity and autonomy, Stewie appears in several scenes where he essentially uses Brian's absence to commit crimes he couldn't have committed with Brian around to stop him. When Brian returns, Stewie attempts to manipulate him by holding sensitive information hostage, threatening to reveal embarrassing secrets unless Brian cooperates with future schemes. This is a form of emotional hostage-taking, using information as leverage rather than physical imprisonment. Stewie also demonstrates a willingness to take family members hostage when it suits his purposes. In one early episode, he locks Meg in a closet for hours simply because she was in his way, and he didn't want her interfering with his plans. He doesn't hurt her physically, but unlawful imprisonment is still a serious crime, even when the victim is your sister and you're technically too young to be prosecuted. The casual way Stewie commits this crime, treating it as a minor inconvenience he had to deal with rather than a serious violation of Meg's rights, shows his complete lack of empathy or moral constraint. The daycare incidents deserve special attention. Several early episodes show Stewie at daycare, interacting with other toddlers, and these scenes are goldmines of criminal behavior. Stewie doesn't just play roughly or steal toys the way normal toddlers might. He establishes dominance through intimidation and violence. He takes other children hostage by cornering them in play areas they can't escape from. He holds their favorite toys ransom, demanding cooperation with his schemes in exchange for the return of their property. He creates a whole system of control and fear among the other babies, essentially running a protection racket in the toddler room. In one particularly memorable daycare scene, Stewie has somehow convinced several other babies to do his bidding, creating a small army of infant accomplices. It's not entirely clear whether these babies understand what Stewie is saying, or whether he's communicating with them on some wavelength that adults can't perceive. But either way, he's recruited and organized other children to help him with his crimes. This turns him from a solo criminal into something more like a gang leader or cult leader, multiplying both his reach and the potential harm he can cause. The most disturbing hostage situation from the early seasons occurs in an episode where Stewie builds what he calls the Club of Forgotten Children, a secret pit where he traps toddlers who have displeased him in some way. The show plays this for dark humor, but let's be clear about what's happening here. Stewie has created a dungeon where he imprisons other children and apparently leaves them to starve to death. This isn't attempted murder. This is premeditated, cold-blooded killing through neglect and confinement. The fact that we never see the full consequences of this pit doesn't make it less horrifying. Stewie literally built a death trap for toddlers who annoyed him. The psychology behind Stewie's hostage-taking is interesting to analyze. Unlike his murder attempts on Lois, which are driven by his specific hatred of his mother, the kidnappings seem to be about power and control for their own sake. Stewie enjoys having complete dominance over another person. He likes knowing that someone's freedom depends entirely on his whim. He gets satisfaction from the fear in his victims' eyes when they realize they're at his mercy. This isn't just about achieving some practical goal. It's about feeding his ego and his need to prove his superiority over others. Brian's repeated victimization also reveals something about Stewie's psychology. Despite holding Brian hostage frequently, Stewie also seems to genuinely enjoy Brian's company and seeks him out for conversation. This suggests that Stewie doesn't fully understand or care about the difference between friendship and imprisonment. He wants Brian around, so he forces Brian to be around, and in his mind, this is a perfectly reasonable way to maintain a relationship. The fact that Brian doesn't have a choice in the matter doesn't seem to register as a problem for Stewie. The hostage situations also showcase Stewie's planning abilities. He doesn't just impulsively grab someone and figure out what to do next. He prepares for these situations by creating secure holding areas, gathering supplies to keep his victims alive when he wants them alive, and establishing protocols for what to do if someone tries to escape or if the outside world comes looking for the missing person. This level of premeditation makes his crimes significantly more serious from a legal standpoint. These aren't crimes of passion or impulsive acts. They're calculated, planned criminal operations. The relationship between Stewie and Lois Griffin is one of the most darkly comedic dynamics in television history. While most mother-son relationships are built on love, nurturing, and mutual care, Stewie and Lois exist in a state of perpetual conflict, with Stewie actively and repeatedly attempting to murder the woman who gave birth to him. To fully understand the scope of Stewie's crimes against Lois, we need to catalog the sheer volume and variety of assassination attempts he's made over the course of the series, particularly in those early seasons when matricide was his primary focus and defining characteristic. Let's start with the most straightforward attempts, the ones where Stewie simply points a weapon at Lois and tries to kill her directly. These happen with stunning frequency throughout seasons 1 through 5. Stewie's laser gun makes regular appearances, aimed at Lois's back while she's cooking dinner, pointed at her head while she's reading a book, trained on her chest while she's sleeping. The fact that these attempts always fail, usually due to some comical interruption or Stewie's poor aim, doesn't diminish their seriousness. Each one represents a genuine attempt to commit matricide, a crime so serious that it occupies a special category in criminal law, recognizing the particular horror of killing one's own parent. The variety of methods Stewie employs is actually impressive from a criminological standpoint, if deeply disturbing from a moral one. He doesn't just stick with guns because they're familiar. He experiments with different approaches, learning from each failure and trying something new. In one episode, he attempts to poison Lois's food, carefully researching which household substances would be lethal in sufficient doses, and then attempting to administer them in ways that wouldn't be immediately detected. The fact that he fails doesn't change the fact that he's committed attempted murder by poisoning, which carries its own specific legal ramifications beyond simple attempted murder. Stewie has tried to kill Lois through mechanical sabotage on multiple occasions. He's tampered with her car brakes, hoping she'll crash and die in what would look like an accident. He's loosened bolts on furniture so it will collapse when she sits on it. He's rigged household appliances to electrocute her when she uses them. Each of these represents not just attempted murder, but also criminal tampering with property and creating hazardous conditions. If any of these attempts had succeeded and someone else had been injured or killed instead of Lois, Stewie would be liable for that death as well under various theories of criminal liability. The psychological dimension of Stewie's hatred for Lois is crucial to understanding these crimes. This isn't random violence or opportunistic murder. Stewie has constructed an elaborate mental framework to justify his matricidal desires. He blames Lois for his 9 months of imprisonment in her womb, which he describes in horrifying terms as his ovarian Bastille. He sees his birth not as the beginning of life, but as an escape from captivity, and he holds Lois personally responsible for that imprisonment. This origin story for his hatred is, of course, completely irrational. Lois didn't imprison him any more than any pregnant woman imprisons her fetus. But in Stewie's mind, this justification is real and valid, and it fuels his endless murder attempts. What makes Stewie's attempts particularly insidious is how he weaves them into everyday family life. Lois isn't safe in her own home, the one place where people should feel most secure. She can't cook a meal without Stewie trying to contaminate the food or cause a gas explosion. She can't do laundry without Stewie trying to trap her in the washing machine or electrocute her with the dryer. She can't sleep peacefully without Stewie creeping into her room with weapons or setting traps that will kill her when she wakes up and gets out of bed. The Griffin home should be a sanctuary, but Stewie has turned it into a hunting ground where Lois is constantly, unknowingly, in mortal danger. Some of Stewie's murder attempts are elaborate productions that require significant planning and resources. In one episode, he constructs an entire fake scenario designed to lure Lois into a trap. He creates a false emergency that requires her to go to a specific location at a specific time. And when she arrives, he's set up an elaborate killing mechanism that should theoretically end her life. The scheme fails, as they always do, but the level of premeditation involved elevates this from simple attempted murder to something more like conspiracy and criminal enterprise. He's not just acting on impulse. He's running operations. The frequency of these attempts also matters from a criminal standpoint. If someone tries to kill you once, that's attempted murder. If they try repeatedly, over an extended period, while continuing to live in your house and pretend to be a normal family member, that's something else entirely. It's sustained, ongoing attempted murder. It's stalking. It's terroristic threatening. It's creating a hostile environment where the victim can never feel safe. Lois doesn't know she's being targeted, but if she did, the psychological trauma of knowing your own infant child is constantly trying to kill you would be devastating. Stewie's willingness to accept collateral damage is another concerning aspect of his murder attempts. On several occasions, his schemes have put other family members in danger. He's set traps that could have killed Peter, Chris, or Meg if they happened to trigger them instead of Lois. He's created explosives that could have destroyed the entire house, killing everyone inside just to ensure Lois's death. This reckless endangerment of innocent parties shows that Stewie's focus on Lois doesn't make him any less dangerous to everyone around her. He's willing to sacrifice anyone who gets in the way of his primary goal. The show occasionally gives us glimpses into Stewie's planning process, showing him in his room surrounded by photographs of Lois marked with X's, diagrams of the house with potential murder locations circled, and notebooks filled with ideas for assassination methods. These scenes are played for comedy, but they depict genuine criminal behavior. Stewie is conducting surveillance on his target, documenting her patterns and habits, and using that information to plan attacks. This is the behavior of a serial killer or professional assassin, just packaged in a diaper and presented with a British accent that makes it seem absurd rather than terrifying. One particularly dark aspect of Stewie's murder attempts is how they sometimes involve manipulating other people to do his dirty work. In several episodes, Stewie tries to trick Peter or other family members into inadvertently harming Lois. He moves objects so Peter will trip and fall into Lois. He convinces Peter to do dangerous things that put Lois at risk. He engineers situations where someone else's actions will result in Lois's death, allowing Stewie to maintain plausible deniability. This shows a sophisticated understanding of how to use others as weapons, while keeping his own hands relatively clean. The weapons Stewie uses against Lois also evolve over time. His early attempts involve crude methods like pushing heavy objects or simple guns. But as his engineering skills develop, so do his murder weapons. He builds increasingly sophisticated devices specifically designed to kill Lois. There's the laser gun that can be programmed to target specific DNA signatures, ensuring it will only fire at Lois even if someone else picks it up. There's the robot assassin programmed with Lois's image and sent to hunt her down. There's the time bomb hidden in Lois's favorite chair, set to explode at the exact moment she typically sits down each evening. Each new weapon represents both technological advancement and escalating criminal intent. Stewie's diary, shown in several episodes, contains detailed accounts of his murder attempts, including dates, methods, reasons for failure, and plans for improvement. From a legal standpoint, this diary would be devastating evidence in any criminal prosecution. It's a written confession to hundreds of attempted murders, complete with premeditation, planning, and an explicit statement of intent to continue attempting murder until successful. The fact that Stewie maintains this record shows either breathtaking arrogance or a complete failure to understand how criminal investigations work. The psychological toll that Stewie's hatred takes on him is rarely discussed, but it's worth considering. He's devoted years of his life, his considerable genius, and enormous amounts of energy to destroying one person. This obsession has shaped his entire personality and worldview. Everything he does and creates is filtered through the lens of how it might help him kill Lois. This isn't healthy behavior, even for a cartoon baby. It's all-consuming hatred that's warping Stewie's development and preventing him from forming normal attachments or pursuing goals beyond destruction. While Stewie's regular, episodic murder attempts are numerous and varied, the most significant criminal event in his ongoing war against Lois comes in the form of the two-part episode Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, which aired as the 100th and 101st episodes of Family Guy. These episodes represent the culmination of everything Stewie had been building toward since the series began. After years of failed attempts, after hundreds of schemes that went nowhere, Stewie finally succeeds in killing his mother. Or at least, he thinks he does. The setup for this massive crime begins with something relatively simple. Lois's birthday is approaching, and Brian gives her tickets for a cruise as a gift. Lois decides to take Peter with her, leaving the children at home. This decision infuriates Stewie, not just because he's being left behind, but because he interprets it as a personal slight. In Stewie's mind, Lois choosing Peter over him is the ultimate rejection, the final proof that she doesn't value him or his company. This perceived abandonment triggers something in Stewie that goes beyond his usual murderous impulses. This time, he's not just planning another attempt that might fail. He's committed to following through no matter what it takes. Brian makes a crucial mistake when he mockingly challenges Stewie's resolve. He laughs at Stewie's angry threats, reminding him that he's made these same promises hundreds of times before and never followed through. Brian doesn't believe Stewie is actually capable of killing Lois, and he says as much. This challenge strikes directly at Stewie's ego and pride. He's not just angry at Lois anymore. He's angry at being dismissed, at being treated like his threats are empty posturing. So Stewie makes a decision. This time will be different. This time he'll prove everyone wrong. This time, Lois Griffin dies. The planning phase of the crime is meticulous. Stewie uses his resources to track the cruise ship's route and schedule. He acquires a speedboat, which raises questions about how a 1-year-old obtains and operates watercraft, but will add boat theft and operating a vehicle without a license to his growing list of crimes. He packs his weapons, choosing his most reliable laser gun rather than experimenting with untested technology. He waits for the right moment when Lois will be vulnerable and isolated. This is no longer the impulsive violence of his earlier attempts. This is a calculated assassination carried out with cold determination. Stewie catches up to the cruise ship and boards it without detection, adding trespassing and unauthorized boarding of a vessel to his crimes. He navigates through the ship until he finds Lois on deck, standing near the railing and looking out at the ocean. This is the moment he's been waiting for since he was born. Lois turns around and sees Stewie standing there with his gun, and for just a second, there's confusion on her face. She doesn't understand what's happening, or why her baby is on the ship pointing what looks like a toy at her. Then Stewie opens fire. The scene is surprisingly brutal for Family Guy, even with the show's reputation for pushing boundaries. Stewie doesn't fire once and hope for the best. He empties his weapon into Lois, shooting her multiple times with the cold efficiency of a professional killer. The bullets, or energy blasts, or whatever his weapon fires, hit Lois in the chest and torso. She staggers backward, already mortally wounded, and falls over the railing into the ocean below. Stewie watches her fall, watches her body hit the water and sink beneath the waves, and for the first time in the series, he's actually succeeded. Lois Griffin is dead, or so it seems. The aftermath of Lois's disappearance showcases multiple additional crimes beyond the murder itself. Stewie says nothing about what happened. He doesn't confess or reveal his involvement. Instead, he allows the investigation to proceed as if Lois simply vanished, which makes him guilty of obstruction of justice and providing false information to investigators. When the authorities question the family, Stewie plays the role of innocent, confused baby, actively deceiving law enforcement while knowing exactly what happened to the missing woman. A year passes in the episode's timeline, and we see how the Griffin family has adapted to Lois's absence. Peter has begun dating other women, treating his wife's disappearance as an opportunity to move on rather than a tragedy to mourn. Chris has been told that Lois is away at a health spa, a lie that Peter and the others maintain to protect him from the truth. Meg, interestingly, seems to be thriving in Lois's absence, no longer subject to her mother's criticism and control. And Stewie is quietly ecstatic, celebrating what he believes is his greatest achievement. The crime takes an interesting turn when Stewie reveals to Brian that he was responsible for Lois's death. This confession is delivered casually, almost offhandedly, as if Stewie is discussing something he accomplished at daycare rather than a murder. Brian is horrified and disgusted, realizing that his friend and companion is actually capable of matricide. He vows to bring Stewie to justice, to make sure he pays for what he's done. This creates a fascinating dynamic where Brian, who has been Stewie's closest ally and confidant, becomes his adversary. But Stewie has already thought several steps ahead. He knows that keeping physical evidence of the crime is dangerous now that people might actually investigate seriously. So he disposes of his gun and the drawings he made depicting various ways to kill Lois, throwing them in the trash outside the Griffin home. This attempt to destroy evidence is itself a crime, showing consciousness of guilt and intent to evade prosecution. Unfortunately for Stewie, this decision backfires spectacularly when Joe Swanson and other investigators search the Griffin family's garbage and find the discarded items. The evidence points toward Peter rather than Stewie, because Peter's handwriting is similar to Stewie's, and also because Peter had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on Lois right after having a fight with her on the cruise ship. Peter becomes the prime suspect in his wife's murder, gets arrested, and goes on trial for a crime he didn't commit. Stewie watches all of this unfold and does nothing to correct the false accusation. He's perfectly content to let Peter take the fall for his crime, which adds yet another charge. Allowing an innocent person to be prosecuted for a crime you committed is a serious obstruction of justice. The trial scenes showcase Peter's complete inability to defend himself properly, with his testimony making him seem even more guilty than the evidence alone would suggest. He makes bizarre statements, goes off on tangents, and generally acts like someone who might actually have killed his wife. The prosecutor has an easy time building the case, and Peter is found guilty of first-degree murder. He's about to be sentenced to life in prison when the courtroom doors burst open and Lois walks in, very much alive. The reveal that Lois survived is both a relief and a complication. She explains that she fell overboard and was rescued by a reverse merman, lived with amnesia at a fat camp in North Carolina, got involved with a white supremacist who turned out to be abusive, and eventually regained her memory and returned to Quahog. It's an absurd story that only makes sense in the Family Guy universe, but the key point is that Lois survived Stewie's attack. This technically reduces his crime from murder to attempted murder, though shooting someone multiple times and leaving them for dead in the ocean certainly qualifies as attempted murder with extreme aggravation. Lois's testimony in court reveals that she knows Stewie tried to kill her. For the first time, an adult in the Griffin family fully understands and articulates the danger that Stewie represents. She tells the court that her infant son shot her with a machine gun and pushed her into the ocean, intending to kill her. Everyone in the courtroom struggles to process this information. The idea that a baby could be a murderer seems impossible, even with the physical evidence of Lois's injuries. But Lois is insistent, and she's right. Stewie realizes he needs to escape before he can be arrested and prosecuted. He flees the courthouse, evading the police through a combination of his small size and the general confusion about whether anyone should actually be chasing a baby. He returns to the Griffin home, where he takes decisive action to protect himself from consequences. He ties up Peter, Lois, Meg, and Chris, holding his entire family hostage at gunpoint. When Cleveland stops by for a casual visit, Stewie shoots and kills him without hesitation, proving that his capacity for murder extends beyond just Lois. The murder of Cleveland is particularly significant because it's not driven by the same obsessive hatred that motivates Stewie's attacks on Lois. Cleveland is simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Stewie kills him as casually as someone might swat a fly. This shows that Stewie has crossed a threshold where murder is no longer reserved for specific targets who have wronged him. He's now willing to kill anyone who inconveniences him or threatens his freedom. This makes him exponentially more dangerous than he was when his violence was focused solely on Lois. Stewie forces Brian to drive him to CIA headquarters in Langley Falls, Virginia, holding his family hostage to ensure Brian's cooperation. This is kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple counts of terroristic threatening. When they arrive at the CIA, Stewie poses as an agent to gain access to the building, which adds impersonating a federal officer to his crimes. Once inside, he hacks into the CIA's supercomputer and takes control of the global power grid, shutting down electricity across the entire planet except where he chooses to allow it. This act of cyber terrorism is perhaps Stewie's most ambitious crime to date. He's not just threatening individuals or even communities. He's holding the entire world hostage, controlling a resource that modern civilization depends on for survival. Hospitals, water treatment plants, food storage, transportation systems, all of these things require electricity to function. By taking control of the power grid, Stewie has put billions of lives at risk and created a global crisis of unprecedented scale. Stewie uses his control over the world's electricity to force global leaders to acknowledge him as President of the World. This is where his world domination fantasy finally becomes reality, at least temporarily. He broadcasts from the White House, appearing on screens worldwide to announce his new oppressive laws. He bans sexual intercourse under penalty of death, showing his childish understanding of human reproduction and his desire to control the most intimate aspects of people's lives. He establishes himself as a dictator with absolute power, backed by his control over technology and his willingness to let people die if they don't submit to his authority. The second part of this 2-episode arc shows the consequences of Stewie's actions spiraling out of control. His family escapes their restraints and comes after him. Peter and Lois stumble upon Stewie's secret weapons cache and realize for the first time just how extensive his criminal operations have been. When they finally confront Stewie in the Oval Office, a firefight breaks out. In the chaos, Lois almost kills Stewie, but finds herself unable to pull the trigger on her own son, despite everything he's done. This moment of maternal instinct and mercy is Lois's final attempt to see humanity in the baby who tried to murder her. But Stewie doesn't reciprocate that mercy. He seizes the opportunity to kill Lois once and for all, taking advantage of her hesitation. Just as he's about to shoot her at point-blank range, Peter shoots Stewie instead. Peter, who had been mostly oblivious to Stewie's true nature throughout the series, finally takes decisive action to protect his wife. Stewie is shot and falls, mortally wounded. The family stands over his body in the burning Oval Office, grieving despite everything he's done, because he's still their son and brother. Then comes the twist that recontextualizes everything we've just watched. The words "simulation over" appear on screen, and we pull back to reveal that Stewie has been sitting in a simulation device in his room the whole time. None of it was real. Or rather, it was all real within the context of a computer simulation that Stewie created to test what would happen if he actually followed through on killing Lois and pursuing world domination. The entire 2-episode arc was Stewie running a sophisticated simulation to game out the consequences of his actions. This revelation raises fascinating questions about criminal culpability. Did Stewie commit any actual crimes if everything happened in a simulation? From a legal standpoint, the answer is complicated. He didn't actually kill anyone in the real world. Cleveland is still alive. Lois was never actually shot on the cruise ship. The CIA was never actually infiltrated. But Stewie did create a detailed simulation of himself committing multiple murders and acts of terrorism, and he did so with the explicit purpose of planning how to carry out those crimes in reality. In many jurisdictions, planning and preparing to commit crimes can itself be criminal, even if the crimes are never actually attempted. the psychological dimension is even more disturbing than the legal one. Stewie spent what appears to be weeks or months in this simulation, living through every detail of killing his mother, watching the consequences unfold, and observing how the world reacted. He experienced the satisfaction of finally achieving his goal, the thrill of global domination, and ultimately, the pain of being killed by his own father. And his conclusion from all of this isn't that he should abandon his criminal plans. It's just that the plans need to wait until he's better prepared to handle the consequences. Brian's reaction to learning about the simulation is telling. He's relieved that none of it actually happened, but he's also disturbed by what the simulation reveals about Stewie's true nature and intentions. Stewie may not have killed Lois in reality, but he absolutely would if he thought he could get away with it. The only thing stopping him is the knowledge, gained through simulation, that killing Lois would ultimately lead to his own death. It's not moral growth or developing empathy that stops him. It's pure self-preservation. The episodes Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie represent a watershed moment in Stewie's character development, even though they ultimately reveal themselves to be simulations. After running through this elaborate scenario and discovering that matricide leads to his own death, Stewie makes a strategic decision to put his most violent impulses on hold. This doesn't mean he becomes a good person or stops committing crimes. It just means he recalibrates his approach, becoming slightly less focused on Lois specifically, and more interested in other forms of chaos and control. The simulation taught him that direct confrontation with his family has consequences he's not ready to face, so he begins channeling his criminal energy in different directions, toward broader schemes of conquest and domination that don't require killing the woman who keeps him fed and clothed. World domination has always been Stewie's secondary goal, running parallel to his obsession with matricide throughout the early seasons. While he spent most of his energy plotting against Lois, he also devoted significant time and resources to developing the tools, technologies, and strategies he would need to conquer the planet. These aren't idle fantasies or childish daydreams. Stewie approaches world domination the same way he approaches everything else, with meticulous planning, sophisticated engineering, and a complete lack of moral restraint. His schemes for global conquest involve technologies and strategies that would make most Bond villains jealous, all conceived and executed by someone who hasn't even celebrated his second birthday yet. Stewie's first serious articulation of his world domination plans comes very early in the series, when he delivers grandiose speeches about his destiny to rule over all humanity. These aren't just angry outbursts or tantrum-fueled threats. Stewie speaks with the conviction of someone who genuinely believes he's destined for global power, someone who sees his current circumstances as a temporary setback rather than his actual reality. He describes elaborate visions of the world under his control, with populations subjugated to his will, resources redirected to serve his purposes, and all of humanity bowing before his superior intellect and power. The specificity and consistency of these visions suggest that Stewie has given serious thought to exactly what kind of dictator he wants to be. What makes Stewie's world domination attempts particularly dangerous is that he has the technological capability to potentially achieve them. This isn't a villain who needs to steal or purchase advanced weapons from shadowy organizations. Stewie builds everything himself in his nursery laboratory, using a combination of genius-level intelligence, apparently unlimited resources, and complete freedom from regulatory oversight. His workshop contains technologies that governments and corporations spend billions trying to develop, and he treats them as casual weekend projects, tinkering with world-altering inventions between naps and diaper changes. The mind control technology Stewie develops represents one of his most serious attempts at global domination. Throughout various episodes, we see him working on devices that can influence or completely control human behavior. His early prototypes are crude and limited in range, affecting only 1 or 2 people at a time and requiring direct proximity to work. But Stewie is nothing if not persistent, and he continually refines his designs, working toward a system that could theoretically control entire populations simultaneously. The ethical implications of this technology are staggering. Mind control removes free will, the fundamental characteristic that makes humans autonomous beings. If Stewie succeeded in deploying this technology on a global scale, he wouldn't just be ruling the world. He'd be eliminating humanity's capacity for self-determination. One episode shows Stewie testing a mind control helmet on Brian, forcing the dog to perform humiliating acts against his will. Brian is fully conscious and aware of what's happening, but completely unable to resist Stewie's commands. He's trapped inside his own body, watching himself do things he finds degrading, while screaming internally for it to stop. This is a preview of what Stewie envisions for the entire human race, billions of people reduced to puppets dancing on strings he controls. The fact that the episode plays this for comedy doesn't diminish the horror of what Stewie is actually doing. He's developed technology that can rape the mind, stealing agency and autonomy from conscious beings. Stewie's weather control device represents another avenue for global domination. The ability to manipulate weather patterns would give him unprecedented power over human civilization. He could create droughts that devastate agricultural regions, causing mass starvation and forcing populations to submit to his demands in exchange for rain. He could generate hurricanes and tornadoes that destroy cities, demonstrating his power while eliminating resistance. He could control rainfall patterns to reward loyal regions with abundant water, while punishing dissent with endless drought. Weather control is a weapon of mass destruction that doesn't require nuclear material or chemical agents. It turns the natural world itself into an instrument of terror and control. When Stewie tests his weather control device, he creates a small localized storm that soaks Peter in the backyard while leaving everything else dry. This demonstrates both the precision and power of his invention. He's not just causing random weather events. He's targeting specific locations with specific conditions, showing the kind of fine control that would make this technology devastating in the hands of someone with global ambitions. The fact that Stewie built this device as almost a side project, something he throws together between other schemes, shows how casually he approaches technologies that could kill millions. The satellite weapon system Stewie develops in various episodes represents his most direct path to global military domination. Unlike mind control or weather manipulation, which work through indirect means, a satellite weapons platform is straightforward violence from space. Stewie designs systems that can fire energy weapons at any point on Earth's surface, giving him the ability to destroy buildings, vehicles, or individuals with perfect accuracy from orbit. This is the ultimate expression of military power, an unstoppable weapon platform that can't be reached by conventional defenses and can strike anywhere at any time. Several episodes show Stewie working on satellites, either building them from scratch or hacking into existing systems and repurposing them for his own use. The hacking of existing satellite systems represents an interesting twist on Stewie's usual approach. Rather than building everything from scratch, he sometimes takes the more efficient route of infiltrating systems that already exist and bending them to his purposes. This shows a mature understanding of criminal efficiency. Why spend months building a satellite and launching it into orbit when you can simply hack into the hundreds of satellites already up there and reprogram them? This approach also demonstrates Stewie's skills in cyber warfare, which complement his engineering abilities. He's not just a builder of physical devices. He's equally comfortable in digital spaces, manipulating software and systems with the same ease he shows when constructing hardware. One particularly ambitious scheme involves Stewie attempting to take control of the world's nuclear arsenals. Multiple episodes reference his efforts to hack into military systems that control nuclear weapons, with the explicit goal of holding the entire world hostage under threat of global annihilation. This is the classic doomsday scenario, the ultimate expression of terroristic power. If Stewie gained control of even a fraction of the world's nuclear weapons, he could demand submission from every nation on Earth. Governments would have no choice but to acknowledge his authority, because the alternative would be nuclear holocaust. The fact that he's attempted this multiple times, each time getting slightly closer to success before being stopped by some external interference, suggests that nuclear blackmail is one of his most persistent strategies. The economic blackmail schemes represent a more subtle approach to world domination. Stewie has occasionally pursued control, not through military force or mind control, but through financial manipulation. He's attempted to crash stock markets, manipulate currency values, and control access to vital resources. These schemes show an understanding that modern civilization runs on economic systems as much as it runs on physical infrastructure. Whoever controls the flow of money controls the flow of power. If Stewie could position himself at the center of global finance, he wouldn't need weapons or mind control. He could simply turn off the economic spigot for any nation or organization that refused to submit to his authority. One episode shows Stewie attempting to corner the market on a vital commodity, creating artificial scarcity to drive up prices and generate massive profits while simultaneously holding populations hostage to his control of supply. This is economic warfare dressed up as capitalism, using market mechanisms as weapons of conquest. The scheme ultimately fails due to Stewie's limited resources and the intervention of forces he didn't anticipate. But the basic strategy is sound. It's the kind of approach that actual billionaires and corporations use to accumulate power in the real world, just accelerated and exaggerated for comedic effect. Stewie's interdimensional crimes represent some of his most complex and potentially devastating activities. Once he develops the technology for interdimensional travel and communication, his ambitions expand beyond just conquering this Earth. He begins exploring parallel universes, alternate timelines, and entirely different dimensions of reality. In some of these adventures, he's simply exploring and causing chaos for its own sake. In others, he's actively attempting to conquer multiple versions of Earth across different realities, treating the multiverse as his rightful domain. These crimes are almost impossible to categorize using conventional legal frameworks because they involve violations that transcend space and time as we understand them. The episode Road to the Multiverse showcases extensive interdimensional criminal activity. Stewie and Brian travel through multiple alternate universes, and in several of them, Stewie commits what would be serious crimes if they occurred in the main reality. He steals technology from alternate versions of himself. He causes disruptions that likely have cascading effects on those universes' histories. He interferes with events in ways that probably alter the course of those realities' development. Each universe he visits is left slightly worse off for his presence, with the damage ranging from minor vandalism to potentially civilization-altering interference. The most serious interdimensional crime Stewie commits is creating stable connections between universes that were never meant to interact. In theoretical physics, opening portals between parallel universes could have catastrophic consequences, potentially causing both universes to collapse or merge in ways that destroy everything in both realities. Stewie treats this existential risk as an acceptable trade-off for his curiosity and desire to explore. He's willing to potentially destroy multiple universes just to see what's on the other side of dimensional barriers. This represents a level of recklessness that goes beyond anything else in his criminal career, because the stakes aren't just millions or billions of lives. It's potentially all life in multiple universes. Time travel introduces an entirely new category of crimes to Stewie's record. Once he successfully builds a functional time machine, which happens relatively early in the series, Stewie gains the ability to alter history itself. This is power on a scale that makes his other crimes look almost quaint by comparison. Weather control can kill millions. Nuclear weapons can destroy cities. But time travel can literally erase people from existence, change the fundamental nature of reality, and create paradoxes that threaten the stability of the timeline itself. And Stewie uses this power casually, traveling through time to satisfy his curiosity, settle petty grudges, or experiment with historical events just to see what happens. Stewie's first major time crime involves traveling back to prevent his own conception, or at least to understand the circumstances of his birth. This is an inherently paradoxical act that could have destroyed reality if it had succeeded. If Stewie prevents his own birth, then he never exists to travel back in time to prevent his birth, which means he does get born, which means he does travel back in time, creating an infinite loop of contradiction. The fact that reality doesn't collapse suggests either that the universe has mechanisms for resolving these paradoxes, or that Stewie's attempt failed in ways he didn't fully understand. Either way, the attempt itself represents a crime against the fundamental structure of causality. Multiple episodes show Stewie traveling through time and casually interfering with historical events. He meets Leonardo da Vinci and steals some of his inventions, potentially depriving humanity of knowledge and innovations that would have emerged earlier in history. He visits ancient civilizations and introduces technologies they weren't meant to have, creating alternate timeline branches where history unfolds completely differently. He encounters his own ancestors and causes disruptions that should theoretically erase his own existence, but somehow don't, suggesting that the timeline has a resilience or flexibility that Stewie doesn't fully understand. The Back to the Pilot episode features extensive time crimes where Stewie and Brian travel back to the very first episode of Family Guy and attempt to change events from that night. This creates a fascinating metacrime where Stewie is literally altering the history of his own television show. The changes they make have cascading effects throughout the timeline, creating alternate versions of events that diverge from the established continuity. When they return to their present, they find that some things have changed in subtle ways, proving that their interference did have lasting effects. This is tampering with history for no reason beyond curiosity and entertainment. A criminal abuse of power that treats the timeline as a playground. Stewie's use of time travel to escape consequences represents another category of temporal crime. On several occasions, when faced with the fallout from his actions, Stewie simply travels back in time and prevents the problematic event from occurring. This is using time travel as a get-out-of-jail-free card, erasing crimes by making it so they never happened. From a philosophical standpoint, if a crime is erased from history by time travel, did it actually occur? The show doesn't grapple seriously with this question, but Stewie's casual use of time travel to avoid accountability suggests that he sees the timeline as something he can edit and revise whenever things don't go his way. The most devastating time crime Stewie commits involves accidentally creating an alternate timeline where he was never born. In Life of Brian, Stewie's time machine is destroyed, stranding him in a reality where he can't undo changes to history. When Brian is killed by a car, Stewie desperately tries to rebuild his time machine to go back and save his friend, but he can't find the crucial component he needs because the manufacturer went out of business. This creates a situation where Stewie's previous time travel activities have indirectly caused consequences he can't escape from. When he finally does manage to travel back and save Brian, he makes the decision to destroy his time machine permanently, recognizing that the power to alter history is too dangerous even for him. Except he doesn't really learn that lesson, because later episodes show him with working time machines again, suggesting that either he rebuilt one despite his resolution, or he had multiple machines stashed in various locations. This inability to permanently give up time travel shows that Stewie is addicted to the power it provides. Even knowing the dangers, even having experienced firsthand how time travel can create inescapable problems, he can't resist the temptation to continue manipulating history whenever it suits his purposes. The crimes Stewie commits in his everyday interactions with society reveal a casual disregard for social order that complements his more dramatic schemes for global conquest. While he's planning to take over the world and plotting elaborate murders, he's also engaging in constant low-level criminal activity that creates a background hum of chaos wherever he goes. These smaller crimes don't get as much attention as his weapons manufacturing or time travel violations, but they add up to a comprehensive pattern of antisocial behavior that makes Stewie dangerous even when he's not actively attempting genocide or matricide. Stewie's interactions with random citizens often involve violence that seems disproportionate to any provocation. Someone bumps into him on the street and he pulls out a weapon and threatens them. A store clerk is rude to him and he vandalizes the store in retaliation. Another child takes a toy he wants and he responds with physical assault that would be aggravated battery if he was old enough to be prosecuted. These aren't calculated acts with clear purposes. They're impulsive expressions of anger and entitlement, showing that Stewie's capacity for violence isn't reserved for his major schemes. He's constantly ready to hurt people who inconvenience or annoy him in even minor ways. The sabotage of public systems represents another category of casual crime. Stewie has tampered with traffic lights, causing accidents and traffic jams for his own amusement. He's hacked into water systems and contaminated supplies with non-lethal but unpleasant substances. He's interfered with communication networks, cutting off phone service to entire neighborhoods just to see what happens. These acts of infrastructure sabotage are serious crimes that endanger public safety and disrupt the functioning of civil society. But Stewie commits them casually, treating public utilities as toys he can play with whenever he's bored. One episode shows Stewie manipulating social groups by starting rumors and spreading false information designed to turn people against each other. He creates conflicts where none existed, destroys friendships and relationships, and generally sows discord for his own entertainment. This is psychological warfare on a social scale, using information as a weapon to cause emotional harm and destroy social cohesion. While it might not be illegal in the same way that physical assault or theft are illegal, the deliberate infliction of emotional distress through lies and manipulation is certainly unethical, and in some jurisdictions could be prosecuted as various forms of harassment or defamation. Stewie's crimes in preschool and daycare settings deserve special attention because they reveal how he operates when surrounded by peers his own age, or at least peers who share his physical age, even if they don't share his intelligence. These environments become laboratories where Stewie experiments with power dynamics and social control, developing skills he'll later apply to his broader world domination plans. The other children become test subjects for his theories about manipulation, intimidation, and control. The establishment of dominance hierarchies in daycare shows Stewie's understanding of social structures and his ability to position himself at the top through strategic use of violence and psychological manipulation. He identifies the strongest or most popular children and either recruits them as allies or neutralizes them as threats. He creates systems of rewards and punishments that condition the other children to obey him. He establishes himself as the source of both benefits and consequences, making himself central to the daycare social ecosystem in ways that give him near total control over the group dynamics. The bullying behavior Stewie engages in at daycare goes far beyond typical childhood conflicts over toys or attention. He targets specific children for sustained campaigns of psychological torture, identifying their weaknesses and exploiting them mercilessly. A child who's afraid of the dark gets locked in closets. A child who's attached to a particular toy has that toy destroyed or held hostage. A child who seeks approval from adults gets undermined and humiliated in front of caregivers. This is systematic bullying carried out with adult-level sophistication in psychological manipulation. The extortion rackets Stewie runs in daycare are particularly impressive from a criminal enterprise standpoint. He establishes protection schemes where other children have to give him their snacks or toys in exchange for Stewie not hurting them or destroying their belongings. He creates monopolies over desirable resources like the best toys or the comfortable nap spots, then charges access fees to children who want to use them. He even establishes what amounts to a loan sharking operation, lending toys to other children with the understanding that they'll be returned with interest in the form of additional toys or favors. These are organized crime operations run by a 1-year-old, showing that Stewie's criminal tendencies aren't just about violence. He also understands economics and the power that comes from controlling resources. The psychological manipulation of other children represents some of Stewie's most insidious behavior. He identifies children who are vulnerable or insecure and befriends them, gaining their trust before using that trust to make them do things they wouldn't otherwise do. He turns children against each other by spreading lies and creating false conflicts. He isolates children from their natural friend groups by poisoning those relationships, making his targets dependent on him for social interaction. This is cult leader behavior, the kind of manipulation that breaks down people's resistance and makes them susceptible to control. The Club of Forgotten Children, mentioned earlier but worth revisiting in this context, represents the darkest extreme of Stewie's daycare crimes. This secret pit where he imprisons children who have displeased him is essentially a death camp for toddlers. The fact that it's played for dark comedy doesn't change what it actually is. Stewie has created a system for disappearing children who annoy him, trapping them in conditions where they'll presumably starve to death. The show never explicitly confirms how many children are in this pit, or what ultimately happens to them, which somehow makes it more disturbing. We're left to imagine the fate of these forgotten toddlers, abandoned by the one child who knew where they were. Stewie's scam operations show a different side of his criminal versatility, demonstrating that he's not just capable of violence and intimidation. He can also commit white-collar crimes with impressive sophistication. Identity theft is one of his recurring tactics, with several episodes showing him creating fake identities or stealing real people's identities to access resources or achieve goals that wouldn't be available to him as a one-year-old baby. He's opened credit card accounts using stolen information. He's created false credentials that grant him access to restricted areas or systems. He's impersonated adults on phone calls and in written correspondence, using his sophisticated vocabulary and understanding of adult social norms to convincingly pass himself off as someone much older. The fraud operations Stewie runs often involve elaborate schemes with multiple steps and moving parts. In one episode, he establishes a fake charity and solicits donations that he then diverts to his own purposes. In another, he runs an investment scam that promises unrealistic returns, collecting money from multiple victims before disappearing with the funds. These aren't impulsive crimes of opportunity. They're carefully planned operations that require sustained effort and attention to detail. The fact that Stewie can manage these complex frauds while also maintaining his other criminal activities shows impressive organizational skills and criminal multitasking. The social engineering schemes Stewie employs demonstrate his deep understanding of human psychology and his ability to manipulate people through carefully crafted deceptions. He researches his targets thoroughly, learning their vulnerabilities and desires. He crafts personalized approaches that speak directly to what each target wants or fears. He builds trust gradually, never pushing too hard too fast, allowing his victims to convince themselves that they're making free choices when they're actually being guided toward predetermined outcomes. This is the kind of sophisticated social engineering that advanced cybercriminals use to infiltrate secure systems or steal valuable information. One particularly clever scam involves Stewie selling fake products door to door, using his appearance as an innocent baby to lower people's defenses. He pitches various items with fabricated benefits and inflated values, relying on people's tendency to be nice to children and their reluctance to refuse what seems like a baby trying to sell things. The products he sells are either completely worthless or are items he's stolen from elsewhere, making this both fraud and fencing stolen goods. The victims often realize they've been scammed only after Stewie is long gone, and even then, they have difficulty believing they were conned by an infant. The genetic engineering crimes Stewie commits represent some of his most ethically troubling activities, pushing into territory where the line between crime and crime against nature becomes blurred. Once Stewie develops the ability to manipulate genetics and create new life forms, he begins experimenting with creating beings that never should have existed, playing God in the most literal sense possible. These aren't just violations of various laws regarding genetic modification and human experimentation. They're violations of fundamental ethical principles about the sanctity of life and the limits of scientific inquiry. Stewie's cloning experiments produce numerous ethical and legal violations. He's created clones of himself on multiple occasions, treating the production of new sentient beings as a casual convenience rather than a profound moral decision. Each clone is a fully conscious individual with thoughts, feelings, and arguably rights, but Stewie treats them as disposable copies, expendable resources he can use for dangerous experiments or tedious tasks. When a clone is damaged or becomes inconvenient, Stewie simply disposes of it and makes a new one, treating murder as acceptable when the victim is genetically identical to himself. The creation of hybrid creatures represents another category of genetic crime. In one of the most infamous episodes, Stewie impregnates himself with Brian's genetic material, creating hybrid human-dog babies that should never have been allowed to exist. This is such an egregious violation of natural order and ethical boundaries that it's difficult to even categorize properly. It involves non-consensual genetic experimentation, since Brian didn't agree to have his DNA used this way. It involves the creation of new life forms without any consideration for whether those beings can survive or thrive. And it results in creatures that are fundamentally confused about their nature, neither human nor dog, but something in between that has no natural place in the world. The forced pregnancy episode also raises questions about bodily autonomy and reproductive rights that the show addresses primarily through comedy, but that have serious underlying implications. Stewie uses technology to make himself pregnant, experiencing the physical and emotional changes that come with pregnancy, despite being male and despite being a baby. The hybrid babies that result are eventually taken by Brian to be raised, but the psychological trauma they might experience as beings who don't fit into any normal category is never really addressed. Stewie created life without considering what that life would be like for the beings he brought into existence. Other genetic experiments shown in various episodes include attempts to create super soldiers with enhanced strength and intelligence, development of genetically modified organisms designed to serve as weapons or surveillance tools, and manipulation of his own genetics to give himself temporary advantages like increased size or enhanced physical abilities. Each of these experiments represents multiple violations of laws and ethical guidelines that exist specifically to prevent the kinds of genetic manipulation Stewie treats as weekend hobby projects. The crimes committed through Stewie's alternate personas and future versions of himself create interesting questions about identity and criminal responsibility. When a future version of Stewie travels back in time and commits crimes, is present-day Stewie responsible for those acts? When Stewie creates alternate versions of himself through cloning or dimension hopping, and those versions commit crimes independently, does the original Stewie bear any responsibility? The show doesn't provide clear answers to these philosophical questions, but the practical result is that Stewie's criminal impact is multiplied by the existence of multiple versions of himself operating simultaneously. The Stu persona, an adult version of Stewie from a possible future, appears in several episodes and generally demonstrates that Stewie's criminal tendencies don't improve with age. Adult Stewie is, if anything, more dangerous than baby Stewie because he has greater physical capabilities and more resources while maintaining the same lack of moral restraint. When adult Stewie commits crimes in the present timeline, should baby Stewie be held accountable for the actions of his future self? It's a paradox that highlights how time travel makes conventional notions of criminal responsibility almost meaningless. The personality split arcs, where Stewie fragments into multiple distinct personalities, each with different characteristics and goals, create similar complications. When evil Stewie commits atrocities while good Stewie tries to stop him, who bears ultimate responsibility? They're aspects of the same person, fragments of a single consciousness that has divided itself, but they have genuinely different desires and make independent decisions. The crimes committed during these personality split episodes can't be easily attributed to a single coherent identity because Stewie literally isn't a single coherent identity during those periods. The crimes caused through identity shifts, where Stewie temporarily becomes someone or something else through technological or magical means, also muddy the waters of criminal responsibility. when Stewie uses a device to swap bodies with someone else and then commits crimes in that person's body. Who's guilty? The body that committed the physical acts or the mind that directed those acts? If Stewie transfers his consciousness into a robot body and that robot kills someone, is it murder or is it property damage since the killer wasn't technically a human being? These philosophical complications don't excuse the crimes or reduce their severity. People are still hurt, property is still destroyed, and society is still disrupted by Stewie's actions, regardless of which version of him committed them, or what metaphysical questions arise about identity and consciousness. But they do highlight how Stewie's technological capabilities have advanced to the point where even basic concepts like who committed this crime become difficult to answer definitively. The partnership between Brian and Stewie represents one of the most productive criminal collaborations in television history. When these two very different characters work together, they accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. Brian provides adult-level reasoning and social skills that help them navigate situations where Stewie's baby body would be a limitation. Stewie provides technology and complete freedom from moral restraint that allows them to pursue goals Brian might hesitate to attempt on his own. Together, they form a criminal partnership that has caused chaos across time, space, and multiple dimensions. The buddy crimes they commit together start relatively small, with joint heists and burglaries that showcase their complementary skills. Brian's ability to pass as a normal dog gives them access to areas where Stewie couldn't go alone. Stewie's technology provides tools for breaking into secure locations and bypassing security systems. In one episode, they team up to rob a bank, with Brian providing the social engineering that gets them into the building while Stewie hacks the vault controls. The heist fails in typical comedic fashion, but the fact that they attempted it at all shows their willingness to commit serious felonies together. The road to episodes represent the pinnacle of Brian and Stewie's criminal adventures, with each installment sending them to a different location or dimension where they proceed to cause absolute mayhem. These episodes function as mini-movies within the series, giving extended time to explore the consequences of Brian and Stewie's partnership when they're removed from the normal constraints of life in Quahog. The crimes they commit during these adventures range from petty theft to actions that alter the course of history, all carried out with a combination of Stewie's resources and Brian's navigation skills. Road to Rhode Island, the first of these adventure episodes, establishes the template for what would become a recurring format. Brian and Stewie find themselves stranded far from home and must work together to return to Quahog, committing various crimes along the way out of necessity and opportunity. They steal vehicles, con people out of money and supplies, and trespass across private property. The journey forces them to rely on each other, developing the partnership that will define their relationship for the rest of the series. The crimes they commit during this episode are relatively minor compared to what comes later, but they set the precedent for Brian and Stewie operating as a criminal unit. Road to Germany sends them back in time to World War II-era Poland, where they immediately become involved in historical events they have no business interfering with. The temporal violations involved in this episode are extensive, with Stewie and Brian interacting with historical figures, participating in events that shape the outcome of the war, and generally treating one of history's darkest periods as an adventure playground. They steal period-appropriate clothing and documents. They impersonate military personnel. They alter events in ways that could potentially change the entire timeline, though the show maintains that history remains intact despite their interference. The ethical implications of their actions in Nazi-occupied Poland are particularly troubling. They witness atrocities, but don't intervene in any meaningful way, prioritizing their own goal of returning home over any moral obligation to help people suffering under fascist occupation. Stewie in particular shows his characteristic lack of empathy, treating the entire experience as an interesting historical field trip rather than a human tragedy. When they finally do take action, it's primarily to serve their own needs, rather than out of any genuine desire to help victims of the Nazi regime. Road to the Multiverse involves crimes across multiple parallel universes, with Brian and Stewie stealing technology from alternate versions of themselves and causing disruptions in various realities. They visit universes where humans are dogs and dogs are humans, where everyone is drawn in different animation styles, where evolution took completely different paths, leading to worlds barely recognizable as Earth. In each universe, they're essentially illegal aliens with no legal right to be there, and they consistently abuse whatever hospitality they receive, stealing what they need, and causing chaos before jumping to the next reality. The interdimensional crimes they commit during this adventure include theft of intellectual property from alternate versions of Stewie who developed different technologies, destruction of property in multiple universes, and potentially catastrophic interference with the boundaries between realities. Each time they open a portal to a new universe, they risk destabilizing the barriers that keep different realities separate. The fact that they do this dozens of times throughout the episode, with casual disregard for the potential consequences, shows how desensitized they've become to the magnitude of their actions. Road to the North Pole features Brian and Stewie traveling to the Arctic to confront Santa Claus, whom Stewie doesn't believe exists and wants to prove is a fraud. When they arrive and discover that Santa is real, but is a broken, exhausted man, barely keeping his operation running, they end up causing even more problems. They disrupt the toy production facility, assault elves who try to stop them, and generally make Santa's already difficult job even harder. When they realize the consequences of Santa's operation failing, with children around the world disappointed on Christmas morning, they attempt to fix the situation, but end up causing additional damage in the process. Road to Las Vegas sends them to the gambling capital, where they use Stewie's technology to cheat at casino games, an activity that's both illegal and extremely dangerous in a city where casinos take theft very seriously. They manipulate slot machines, count cards using enhancement technology, and generally defraud the casinos out of substantial sums of money. When they're inevitably caught, they have to use more of Stewie's gadgets to escape from casino security, causing property damage and assaulting security personnel in the process. The episode is a crime spree from start to finish, with Brian and Stewie treating Las Vegas as a playground where normal rules don't apply. Road to India takes them to the Indian subcontinent, where they commit a series of cultural violations and actual crimes while searching for something Stewie has lost. They trespass on religious sites, steal artifacts, and show complete disrespect for cultural practices and sacred traditions. Stewie's characteristic lack of empathy is on full display as he bulldozes through a culture he doesn't understand and doesn't care to learn about, caring only about retrieving his lost item. Brian, who should theoretically have more cultural sensitivity, goes along with everything Stewie does, making him equally culpable for their offenses. The major homicide events in Stewie's criminal career represent the times when his violence crossed from attempted murder into actual successful killing. While many of his schemes involve potentially lethal actions that fail to kill anyone, there are several confirmed incidents where Stewie's actions directly resulted in someone's death. These kills reveal the most dangerous aspects of his personality, the moments when his intelligence, resources, and complete lack of empathy combine to actually end lives, rather than just threatening to do so. The most prominent confirmed kill in the simulation episodes is Cleveland Brown, shot dead in the Griffin living room while the family was tied up and helpless to intervene. While this killing technically occurred within Stewie's simulation rather than in the real world, it still represents a genuine intention and willingness to commit murder. Stewie shot Cleveland not because Cleveland posed any threat or had done anything to deserve death, but simply because Cleveland was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This casualness is what makes the killing so chilling. Cleveland was just stopping by to visit his neighbors, something he'd done hundreds of times before, and Stewie executed him without hesitation or remorse, simply because he was inconvenient. The child victims in the Club of Forgotten Children represent multiple confirmed kills, though the show never explicitly shows us their deaths. We know Stewie created a pit where he imprisons children who displease him, and we know these children are forgotten, meaning nobody comes looking for them. the implication is clear, even if the show never forces us to witness it directly. These children starved to death in Stewie's prison, making him responsible for multiple murders through willful neglect. The fact that the victims are toddlers makes these killings particularly heinous. These aren't adults who might have resources or abilities to survive. They're helpless children dying slowly in darkness, while the one person who knows where they are deliberately leaves them to die. Various episodes show Stewie killing minor characters, background people who appear briefly only to be murdered by Stewie for minor offenses or no reason at all. Someone cuts in front of him in line and gets vaporized by his ray gun. A person makes a rude comment and dies in an explosion rigged by Stewie. These kills happen so quickly and are played so much for comedy that they're easy to miss, but they represent real body count accumulating in Stewie's criminal record. The show treats human life as expendable when it comes to Stewie's actions, with random characters existing primarily to die in amusing ways that showcase his weapons and his willingness to use them. The indirect kills, where Stewie's actions or inventions lead to deaths, even though he didn't personally pull the trigger, represent another category of homicide. When Stewie builds a device that malfunctions and kills someone, he bears responsibility for that death, even if it wasn't his direct intention. When he creates a situation that leads predictably to someone's death, he's guilty of causing that death even if he wasn't physically present when it happened. These indirect homicides are harder to catalog because the chain of causation is sometimes unclear, but they're numerous, and they matter. One episode features a device Stewie built that was stolen or repurposed by someone else and used to commit murder. Even though Stewie didn't use the device himself, he created the weapon knowing it could be used to kill, and he didn't implement any safeguards or security measures to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. From a legal standpoint, this is like leaving a loaded gun where a child can find it. The person who pulled the trigger bears primary responsibility, but the person who created the dangerous condition shares in the blame. The fan theories about hidden murders add another layer to Stewie's body count, with careful viewers noticing background details and throwaway lines that suggest additional killings. Characters who appear in one episode and are then mentioned as dead in a later episode, with circumstances that point towards Stewie's involvement. Bodies seen briefly in the background of Stewie's laboratory. Newspaper headlines glimpsed for just a moment that describe mysterious deaths matching Stewie's methods. These potential additional murders can't be confirmed definitively, but the circumstantial evidence suggests that Stewie's actual kill count may be significantly higher than the explicitly shown deaths. The international crimes Stewie commits show that his criminal activities aren't limited to Quahog or even to the United States. He's committed serious offenses in multiple countries across multiple continents, demonstrating both his resources and his complete disregard for international law. These foreign crimes complicate any potential prosecution because they involve multiple jurisdictions, international treaties, and complex questions about which country has the authority to try him for which offenses. The crimes in the United Kingdom come primarily from episodes where Stewie returns to what he considers his homeland, given his British accent and his apparent identification with British culture. During these visits, he commits vandalism against historical sites, theft from museums and private collections, and various acts of public disturbance that get him banned from establishments. He treats British law with the same contempt he shows for American law, seeing himself as above the legal systems of any nation. The Las Vegas crimes from Road to Vegas involve casino fraud, which, while technically occurring in the United States, violates Nevada's specific gambling laws and regulations. Nevada treats casino fraud as an especially serious crime because gambling tourism is central to the state's economy. Stewie's use of technology to cheat at casino games would carry severe penalties, including substantial prison time, and the casinos themselves often have their own security forces that handle cheaters with methods that exist in legal gray areas. The German crimes from Road to Germany involve temporal violations committed on German soil during World War II. Even though these crimes technically occurred in the past, if we accept time travel as real within the show's universe, then Stewie violated German laws, Nazi laws, and international laws governing conduct during wartime. He impersonated military personnel, stole military equipment and supplies, interfered with military operations, and generally committed acts that would be considered espionage and sabotage under wartime legal frameworks. The Indian crimes from Road to India include cultural heritage violations, with Stewie stealing or attempting to steal artifacts that belong to the Indian people as part of their historical and religious heritage. Many countries have specific laws protecting cultural treasures from theft or export, recognizing that these items have value beyond their monetary worth. Stewie's disregard for these protections shows his inability to understand or respect the significance these objects hold for the cultures that created them. Multiple Road to episodes involve crossing international borders illegally, making Stewie guilty of immigration violations in numerous countries. He doesn't bother with passports, visas, or any of the legal documentation required for international travel. He simply appears in whatever country he wants to visit, commits whatever crimes strike his fancy, and then leaves before authorities can respond effectively. This pattern of border violations and international criminal activity makes him potentially subject to Interpol investigation and international warrants. The government-level crimes represent Stewie's most ambitious attempts to interfere with political systems and state operations. When he hacks into CIA systems during the simulation episodes, he's committing crimes against the United States government at the highest level. Unauthorized access to classified government systems carries penalties that include life imprisonment and could potentially be prosecuted as treason or espionage, depending on exactly what information was accessed and how it was used. The manipulation of public policy happens when Stewie interferes with governmental decisions through hacking, blackmail, or manipulation of officials. In various episodes, he's influenced legislation, altered government databases, and interfered with regulatory decisions. These actions subvert democratic processes and represent attacks on the fundamental systems of governance. When one person, especially one infant with no accountability or oversight, can alter how government functions, the entire social contract breaks down. The war crimes interpretations of some of Stewie's actions come from examining his behavior through the lens of international humanitarian law. When he builds weapons of mass destruction, he's violating treaties that ban development of certain weapon types. When he uses prohibited weapons or tactics, even in simulation or against fictional enemies, he's acting in ways that mirror war crimes as defined by Geneva Conventions and other international agreements. When he targets civilians or uses methods designed to cause unnecessary suffering, he's crossing lines that the international community has agreed should never be crossed. The humorous war crimes, where Stewie commits acts that technically meet the definition of war crimes but are presented in absurdly comic contexts, still count as crimes even if the show doesn't treat them seriously. Using prohibited weapons, targeting protected sites like hospitals or schools, engaging in perfidy by misusing protected symbols like red crosses. These are all serious violations of international humanitarian law. The fact that they happen in a cartoon doesn't make them any less serious as legal matters within the show's universe. As the series progresses, particularly after the simulation episodes where Stewie experiences the consequences of actually killing Lois and achieving world domination, we begin to see changes in his behavior that complicate our understanding of his character. These aren't sudden transformations that erase his criminal past, but gradual shifts that make him less consistently villainous and more occasionally capable of empathy and genuine connection with others. This evolution raises interesting questions about redemption, whether someone with Stewie's history can truly change, and what it means when a character stops committing certain crimes while maintaining the capacity to commit them. The softer moments that emerge primarily involve Stewie's relationship with Brian, which evolves from occasional kidnapper and victim to genuine friendship built on mutual respect and affection. The episode Brian and Stewie is perhaps the most significant marker of this shift, featuring an extended sequence where the two are trapped in a bank vault and forced to rely on each other for survival. During this time, They have brutally honest conversations about their fears, insecurities, and the genuine care they feel for each other despite their complicated history. When Brian attempts suicide and Stewie saves his life, it's a moment of selfless heroism that seems completely at odds with the character who spent years building weapons to murder his mother. The death of Brian in Life of Brian provokes the most extreme emotional response we've ever seen from Stewie. When Brian is hit by a car and killed, Stewie doesn't react with his usual cold detachment or dark humor. He's genuinely devastated, crying real tears and desperately trying to find a way to bring Brian back. The fact that his time machine has been destroyed means he can't simply reverse the death, forcing him to experience real grief and loss. The lengths he goes to in attempting to rebuild the time machine, ultimately sacrificing his future ability to manipulate history just to save one friend, represents a level of selflessness and emotional vulnerability that early season Stewie never would have shown. Other moments of empathy appear scattered throughout later seasons, where Stewie shows concern for family members or even strangers in ways that contradict his established personality. He helps Lois with problems despite supposedly hating her. He shows kindness to Chris or Meg when they're struggling. He assists Peter with schemes that don't benefit Stewie directly. These moments don't completely redefine his character, but they create complexity, showing that Stewie is capable of caring about others when circumstances align properly. The decrease in Stewie's criminal activity over later seasons has multiple explanations, both within the show's universe and from a meta perspective about the show's writing. Within the story, the simulation experience appears to have genuinely affected him, showing him consequences he wasn't prepared to face, and making him reconsider whether his long-term goals are actually worth pursuing. He stops attempting to kill Lois, not because he's forgiven her or resolved his hatred, but because he's calculated that the consequences of succeeding would be worse than the satisfaction of revenge. From a writing perspective, the creators have acknowledged that Stewie's evolution reflects changing approaches to the character as they discovered new comedic territory to explore. The murderous baby trying to kill his mother was funny for a while, but it was also limiting. By softening Stewie and making him less consistently evil, they opened up new story possibilities and allowed him to participate in different types of plots. The road to episodes, for instance, wouldn't work if Stewie was still primarily focused on matricide. Those adventures require him to be capable of partnership and growth, which necessitated moving away from his original characterization. The meta-commentary about this shift sometimes appears within the show itself, with characters acknowledging that Stewie seems different than he used to be, or with Stewie himself commenting on his own character development. These moments of self-awareness suggest that the creators are conscious of how they've changed the character and want to address it explicitly, rather than hoping audiences won't notice. It's a sophisticated approach that acknowledges the evolution while still maintaining enough of Stewie's edge to keep him interesting. The psychological analysis of Stewie's character requires examining the various factors that shaped him into a criminal genius baby. The narcissism is obvious from the start, with Stewie viewing himself as inherently superior to everyone around him and feeling entitled to power and control. His intellectual gifts combine with this narcissistic personality to create someone who believes he deserves to rule others simply by virtue of being smarter than they are. This is the classical dictator mindset, the belief that superior capability justifies authoritarian control. The trauma elements are less obvious, but clearly present when examined carefully. Stewie's obsession with his time in Lois's womb, describing it as imprisonment and captivity, suggests a fundamental trauma around his origins and existence. Whether this trauma is real within the show's logic or is a delusional justification Stewie has constructed to explain his own murderous impulses, it clearly shapes his worldview and his relationship with his mother. His inability to form secure attachments with most people, his constant need to prove his superiority, and his difficulty expressing vulnerability all point to deep psychological wounds that drive his behavior. The environmental influences can't be ignored when analyzing Stewie's development. He's growing up in the Griffin household, which is dysfunctional by any measure. Peter is neglectful and abusive in his stupidity. Lois is controlling and often dismissive of her children's needs. Meg is emotionally damaged from constant family abuse. Chris is developing his own behavioral problems. The family environment teaches Stewie that violence is normal, that manipulation is how you get what you want, and that other people's feelings don't really matter. If Stewie had been raised in a nurturing, stable environment, would he still have developed into a criminal mastermind? The show never explores this question seriously, but it's worth considering how much of Stewie's behavior is nature versus nurture. The question of whether Stewie is truly evil or simply misunderstood is complicated by the show's shifting tone and characterization. Early Stewie seems genuinely evil, with no redeeming qualities and no moral compass whatsoever. He wants to kill his mother and conquer the world, and he pursues these goals with single-minded determination and complete disregard for anyone who gets hurt along the way. This Stewie is a villain, plain and simple, a sociopath whose intelligence makes him dangerous, but whose fundamental nature is malevolent. Later Stewie is more complex, showing capacity for love, friendship, and genuine heroism alongside his continued willingness to commit crimes when it serves his purposes. This Stewie is harder to classify as purely evil. He's selfish and often cruel, but he's also capable of growth and change. He forms genuine attachments and shows real emotions beyond just anger and hatred. He makes sacrifices for people he cares about, even when those sacrifices don't benefit him directly. This evolution suggests that Stewie was never truly evil in the sense of being irredeemably wicked. He was damaged, traumatized, and shaped by his environment in ways that led him down dark paths, but he retained the capacity to become something better. The comedy context reframes all of Stewie's crimes in ways that make them easier to accept and laugh at, despite their severity. In a realistic drama, a character who commits even a fraction of Stewie's crimes would be portrayed as a monster, someone we root against and hope to see punished. But Family Guy's comedic framework allows us to enjoy Stewie's villainy without taking it too seriously. We know nobody will really get hurt in any permanent way. We know the show will reset to status quo by the next episode. We know this is all fictional and absurd and not meant to be taken as a realistic portrayal of human behavior. This comedic distance is essential to making Stewie work as a character. If we took his crimes seriously, if we actually processed the horror of what a murderous genius baby would mean in reality, he would be unwatchable. Instead, we laugh at the absurdity of the situation, at the contrast between his baby appearance and his sophisticated villainy, at the various ways his schemes fail despite his intelligence. The comedy makes his crimes palatable, transforming actions that would traumatize us in drama into entertainment that we actively seek out. The complete crime timeline of Stewie's activities across all seasons would require a book-length treatment to capture every offense. But we can trace the major developments season by season, watching how his criminal career evolved alongside his character development. Season 1 establishes the foundation, introducing us to a Stewie who is already fully formed as a villain, already plotting matricide and world domination before we meet him. His crimes in these early episodes are direct and straightforward, mostly involving weapon construction and murder attempts with occasional kidnappings and general mayhem mixed in. Season 2 and 3 see Stewie expanding his criminal repertoire, experimenting with different types of weapons, and developing more sophisticated technologies. His time machine first appears during this period, opening up entire new categories of crime. His crimes become more elaborate and ambitious, moving beyond simple murder attempts toward grander schemes that affect more people. The confidence he gains from successfully building increasingly complex devices emboldens him to attempt things he might have considered impossible earlier. Seasons 4 through 6 represent the peak of Stewie's villainy, culminating in the simulation episodes where he finally achieves his twin goals of killing Lois and conquering the world. These seasons feature his most serious crimes and his most ambitious schemes. He's at the height of his powers, with a fully stocked arsenal, mastery of time travel and dimensional manipulation, and the confidence to take on the CIA and the world's governments. If there was ever a period when Stewie represented an existential threat to human civilization, this was it. Season 7 onward show the gradual softening of Stewie's character, with his crimes becoming less focused on murder and conquest, and more oriented toward general chaos and adventure. He still commits serious offenses, but they're often in the context of misadventures with Brian, rather than deliberate campaigns of destruction. His weapons appear less frequently. His plots against Lois fade to occasional references, rather than driving motivations. He remains dangerous, but the nature of his danger shifts from active threat to chaotic neutral force that might help or harm depending on circumstances. The hidden crimes embedded in background details and quick scenes add significantly to Stewie's total count. Careful viewers have cataloged numerous moments where Stewie can be seen in the background, doing something illegal, or where dialogue references crimes that happen off-screen. A character mentions that Stewie burned down a building, but we never see it happen. A news report briefly shows footage that could be Stewie's work, though it's never confirmed. These Easter egg crimes reward attentive viewers while adding layers to Stewie's criminal history that casual viewers might miss entirely. The fan-discovered moments where freeze-framing or careful analysis reveals criminal activity include weapons visible in Stewie's room during scenes focused on other things, bloodstains or bodies visible in backgrounds, and computer screens showing illegal activities when the main action is happening elsewhere in the frame. These hidden details suggest that Stewie's crimes continue constantly, even when we're not watching him directly, that the episodes we see represent just a fraction of his total criminal output. The final reflection on Stewie's criminal career must acknowledge the unique position he occupies in animated television history. He's simultaneously one of the most dangerous characters ever depicted in a sitcom and one of the most beloved. His crimes are numerous and severe enough that if cataloged seriously, they would justify multiple life sentences in any court system. Yet audiences adore him, quote him, and celebrate his villainy because it's presented in a context that makes it entertaining rather than disturbing. Stewie's legacy as a cartoon supervillain is secure. He's influenced subsequent animated characters, with creators drawing inspiration from the concept of a baby who speaks and acts like an adult. He's become a cultural icon, whose phrases and mannerisms are recognized even by people who've never watched Family Guy. His criminal career, while fictional, represents a fascinating exploration of how far you can push a character's villainy while maintaining audience sympathy and entertainment value. His place in animated history is as one of the great character evolutions, someone who started with a clear, simple premise and gradually became something much more complex without losing the essential elements that made him compelling in the first place. The murderous baby trying to kill his mother was funny and shocking. The dimensional adventurer having philosophical conversations with his dog, while occasionally still committing serious crimes, is a different kind of compelling, showing growth while maintaining continuity with who he was. The sleep-friendly ending to this comprehensive examination of Stewie's crimes should acknowledge that despite everything we've discussed, despite the extensive catalog of violence and chaos, Stewie Griffin remains ultimately a fictional character whose crimes exist to entertain us rather than harm us. In the comfort of knowing that none of this is real, we can appreciate the creativity and audacity of creating a character like this. Someone who breaks every rule and crosses every line while remaining fundamentally watchable and even lovable. As you drift off to sleep, thinking about Stewie's criminal empire, his weapons lab hidden in a nursery, his time machine adventures, his complex relationship with the family he's tried to destroy, remember that the appeal of characters like Stewie is that they let us explore dark impulses and transgressive fantasies in a safe context where nobody actually gets hurt. We can laugh at his schemes and enjoy his villainy because we know it's all pretend, all carefully crafted entertainment designed to push boundaries while staying just this side of genuinely disturbing. So rest easy knowing that Stewie Griffin despite his best efforts, has never actually conquered the world, never actually killed his mother, and never actually succeeded in becoming the dictator he dreams of being. His crimes remain safely contained within the fictional universe of Family Guy, existing only to make us laugh and think, and appreciate the absurdity of a 1-year-old British baby with a ray gun and dreams of global domination. Sweet dreams, and may your own babies be considerably less homicidal than Stewie Griffin.